Hey guys, welcome. We're painting a haunted forest today. We're going to start with taping off the edges of our paper. My paper is about 5x7 Arches cold press watercolor paper. Alright, let's wake up our paints. Let's put some water on it. And we're going to swatch the colors that we're going to use. You're going to need a black, a brown, and a blue. So it looks like my blue is kind of dirty, so I apologize. So here I am trying to clean it off a little bit just so you can see the blue that is underneath. But overall, it's just a simple blue that you have on your palette. Any blue should do. Almost like a sky blue. I think this is called cerulean blue. And then finally, you'll need a green. And finally, you're going to need white. This is gouache, but you can also use bleedproof white by Dr. P.H. Martin. If you don't have those, you can use a jelly roll or a white pen, like the jelly roll pen, and even white acrylic paint if you have that. That should work just fine. So we're going to start with drawing a small circle for the moon. And after drawing it, I'm going to erase it just a little bit so the pencil line doesn't show up in my final painting. Just enough for me to still see it. Now we're going to use clean water to wet our entire paper. Take your time with this. Avoid the circular moon. We want to keep the moon dry and the rest of our paper wet. My paper tends to be, I think, a bit drier than other types of paper. My paper is Arches cold press. It's kind of thirsty, so I usually wet it a couple times before I actually start painting. We want the paper to soak in the water, and we don't want a puddle of water on top of the paper. And if you have a lot of water on your tape, make sure you wipe it off gently with your paper towel. We're going to start with mixing up the color for the sky and background trees using our black and our blue. So the color that we are aiming for is a bluish black color. And we're going to test it out to make sure that it is a good color and the right consistency. We don't want it too thick and we don't want it too light. Our paper should still be wet. If not, you can re-wet it. One thing to keep in mind when mixing our colors is know that especially when you are painting on top of wet paper, the colors that you put down might look a certain darkness. It might look dark, but once it dries, it's going to be much, much, much lighter. So the color that I have mixed up, it looks dark right now, but it's going to be pretty light when we put it down on top of wet paper, and then even more when it is dry. So I'm going to use my large round brush and drop in some colors starting around the edge of the moon, and I'm going to let the colors bleed out. Then we're going to use the belly of the brush to make circular motions starting from the moon and going out away from it. And for the sky, we want to make sure that the areas around the moon is pretty light because we want to show light glowing from it. And then we're going to concentrate we're going to concentrate our colors around the edges of the painting. And this will help portray light glowing from the moon. And make sure that your paper is still wet when you are working on the sky. If it is not, let it dry completely and then re-wet it with clean water. And then you can continue on with putting down colors for your sky. Make sure you use circular motion for the areas going away from the moon and sort of around the edges, creating sort of a vignette almost. And this really helps shape the sky. And then the next step is we're going to create the mist in the distant background. You want a clean, slightly moist piece of paper towel, kind of wad it together and gently dab your paper, your painting, where you want the mist to be. Be very gentle with this step. All right, so my mist is in. I'm going to go back in and kind of add more color towards the bottom and kind of define the ground or the horizon line for the painting and where the forest ground is. And then the next step is creating foliage in the distant or in the background. Remember, the further away an object is in your landscape, the smaller it is. So make sure these tree branches or twigs are pretty thin or small, and we don't want it too dark. Right now I'm using the tip of my brush, sort of the other end of my brush, to create a sharp object to draw in twigs. Or you can use a thin liner brush or a small round brush to draw in your branches. There's really no rhyme or reason to this step. Just make sure that you don't cover up all of your mist. You can bring a twig or a branch across the moon if you would like to do that. Make sure, again, to keep your branches thin and your color relatively light because all of this is in the distance. I know everything looks really dark right now, but it's going to dry really light, trust me. So our next step is to paint the foreground or the ground of the forest. For this, I mixed up green and brown, mostly brown, for a muted, earthy looking green. My paper is still wet, so I'm holding it up, I'm tilting it down so that the green-brown mixture doesn't bleed up towards the sky. At the same time, I'm going to make more blackish brown color to drop in along the horizon of the forest as well, just to define it some more. And this can be foliage in the background, bushes. And I'm also going to make sort of the edges of my foreground darker than the middle part, again with the vignette sort of inspiration. Add as many trees as you want until you're happy with that. I'm also going to go back in and again redefine the horizon line. I decided to add a little bit more mist kind of in between the trees. And I'm going to lift up a little bit of color along the foreground on the ground, sort of underneath where the moon is, just to add more light to that area. And that was done just by dabbing up some of the colors with a clean paper towel. All right, so I think I am happy with this. So we're going to let this dry completely before moving on to the next step. Notice how much lighter it is now once it's dry. It can be a little frustrating, but it really is part of the learning process. So our next step is painting the next set of trees. This is not our final set of trees, so we don't want this to be the darkest color or our darkest trees. So I'm using pretty much black, brown, touch of blue, and a touch of green. Again, I want this color to still be somewhat watery and somewhat light. And again, this is not the darkest trees, and these are going to be bigger than the ones that we have already painted because they're a little bit closer to us, and also a little darker, so a little bigger and a little darker. And you can start these trees at the part of the foreground that is a little closer to us as well. So I'm using my middle or maybe an 8 size round brush to paint these trees. So take your time with these sets of trees. It is a lot easier to go light, and if you decide that it's too light and it blends in too much with the trees that you've already painted, you can always go back and paint another layer on top or make it a little bit bigger. So go light, and if you're not happy with that, then you can add some more colors on top. But if you go in dark from the get-go, it's going to be a little bit harder to fix that. And once you paint those trees in, make sure you paint in a little bit of a foliage or bushes sort of towards the end, just to kind of ground the trees and bring the trees to the foreground a little bit more. And the thing about trees to remember is the trunk is usually bigger than the branches that come off of them. And if you find it hard to draw the thinner branches coming off of the trunks, you can switch over to your liner brush or your smaller, maybe round 2 brush. So that's okay to do. I am switching over to a liner brush right now just to add a little bit more thin trunks and twigs, just to keep it interesting, I guess. If you're happy with yours, the density of your forest, then you don't have to do this step. But remember, this layer value is still not the darkest, so make sure that you remember that. So when you go mix up your colors, make sure that you add a good amount of water just to lighten it up. The layers of trees that I've put down seems to dry kind of light, so I wasn't happy with that. So here I am adding some more trees, making it a little bit lighter and kind of going over the ones that I've already painted a little bit just to make it a little bit darker. Again, not the darkest, but just a little bit darker so that it shows up a little bit more and kind of separate itself from the distant first layer of trees that we painted. And don't forget to bring some of that color down to the ground as well, just to ground the trees. And it also really adds to the mystery of the forest ground. It could be fallen leaves, twigs, grass, rocks. And this is me swatching the last value of our layers of trees. So it's going to be the darkest value, meaning much less water in our color mixture. Again, using black, brown, touch of blue, touch of green, mostly black and brown. But we want this layer to be completely dry first before we move on to our last layer of trees. All right, guys, so we're getting close to being done with this forest. We're coming out of the forest, so to speak. So for this last layer of trees, again, the darkest value, so the darkest color, because it's closer to you. And we want these trees to be the biggest compared to the 2 layers that we painted prior. Again, remember the trunk is bigger than the branches that come off of them. And then remember to ground your trees by painting in shadows on the ground and bushes and foliage and leaves coming up from the edges of the trunks, whatever you want to make of it. Bring some of the thin branches across the moon for interest. Have fun with this layer. And so once you're happy with your trees, make sure you let this layer dry completely before we move on to painting the ghosts. All right, for the ghosts, you're going to need your white paint. So I'm going to choose to use my bleedproof white from Dr. Peach Martin. The ghosts are a lot easier than they look, or maybe it looks easy to you, but you'll want your small round brush, and just a little bit of your white paint. And what you're going to want to do is, so I'm going to show you a close-up of the ghosts that I painted. The ghosts in the distance, further away from you, are going to be smaller. And then for the ghosts closer to you, you're going to want them to be bigger. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with sort of like a C-shape white mark on your paper. Dab off most of the paint and water, and then using mostly a dry brush, we're going to smear it down into the shape of a floating ghost. If you want to draw an arm for your ghost, just draw a smaller C shape on the side. Dab off your brush so that it's mostly dry, and then with your dry brush, smear it down. So that could be a ghost with an arm or carrying something, or a ghost with a smaller ghost friend next to him or her. So be creative. Try to pick an area of your painting with that is darker so that your white ghosts will show up better. If you try to paint your white ghosts on top of a part of your painting that is relatively white, it's going to be hard to see the ghost. And I was just thinking, if you are not really a spooky Halloween kind of person, but you like the moody forest scene and you don't want to paint ghosts, you can paint a silhouette of, I don't know, rabbits or deer, maybe just some birds in the forest, or even fireflies. You can do that. All right, so this next step is optional. I have one small bat in the distance close to the moon in my original painting. So if you would like to add that, you can. Let's kind of practice it a little bit on a scratch sheet of paper. You're going to want your darkest value color and your small brush. And for a bat, you just paint kind of find your middle part of the bat where the body is and draw a wing that is sort of like a V shape up top and an upside down V at the bottom. Let's keep it very, very simple, guys. It can be a bat in the distance. It can be a crow, a raven flying, or just a bird. And whatever you end up painting, as long as it resembles a bird or something flying, I think that that's good enough. It's in the distance and we do not need any details. If you're not comfortable with painting this, you can leave it out. I think that is just fine. So I think for this second painting, the one that I'm working on right now, my bird ended up looking more like my bat ended up looking more like a generic bird, and that's okay. I'm happy with that. I'm adding a little bit more texture on the ground of the forest using a dry brush, meaning very little water on my brush and mostly paint. And that creates a little bit more interest. Looks like grass, shadows, leaves. And make sure that everything is dry so that we can peel the tape, my favorite part. So for tape peeling, make sure you are pulling away from your painting when pull slowly. Another way to help your tape come off is use a blow dryer or art dryer to heat it up a little bit before you peel. I hope you paint this later, or I hope you paint it with me. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. So let me know if you have any questions, and make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Bye.